First mountain is in Argentina. Well, it's on the border of Argentina and Chile, called Mount Aconcagua, the biggest one in South America. I joined a team that was heading down there to climb this summit. If you have no skills in the adventure world, you can buy yourself onto a team that's already heading down there. You get a guide, you get some porters if you need them, and you can just go and have a crack. So that's what I did. My first mountain, sort of the typical guy with all the gear and no idea, that was me. But I was fit, strong, and keen, and up we went. Now, if you don't know anything about mountaineering, it's not just one push up the mountain. We sort of get into base camp with some donkeys and porters, and then you're going up to camp 1, back to base camp. Up to camp 2, back to camp 1. Up to camp 3, back to 2. So you're going up and down the mountain over the days and weeks to acclimatise to the altitude. So Aconcagua was just under 7,000 metres in height. It's a massive peak. We were about 3 weeks in the mountains, and we're probably 2.5 days away from our own summit attempt, that day when we're going to go for the top. A storm came in, unpredicted, unforecasted, and it just tore the mountain up for a 24-hour period. At that exact same time, there was a Spanish team pushing to the summit. They were caught out in the open, whiteout conditions, got disorientated, and they died of exposure. So here I am sitting back at camp 2, and we get these radio calls that there's people missing and there's fatalities on the mountain. This was big mountains. I wasn't ready for that, but you took it all on board and we kept pushing. When we were making our way to the summit, we come to a ridgeline called Independencia, this little point where we start to head up a different direction on the mountain. As we're heading up there, on the side of the trail was one of these climbers wrapped in a silver blanket. So here was this guy that could have had 10 years more experience than me, frozen solid on the peak. Now, I'd seen dead people in the military, but they were bad people. You don't have a connection to what you consider a very bad person. But this guy up on that mountain was me. He was a climber, just looking to summit a mountain, have a great time, and now he's dead. So you start asking questions of yourself, like, what the bloody hell am I doing up here? What's it for? You convince yourself you're fit, you're strong, this is what you really want, got a good guide with me, the team's doing well, and we pushed on. We were lucky. Mother Nature dictates everything. We had perfect conditions, we summited, and we got off the mountain, and I successfully hit the first of my 7 summits, the first on my list of 7 to do that year. Flew from South America to North America, straight to Alaska. We're going to go and climb Mount McKinley, or Denali in the local language. A absolutely beautiful peak, but freezing cold. Minus 20s, 30s every single day. So this was the first time I was wearing snowshoes, first time dragging a sled, and it was my first time encountering crevasse fields. So as the glaciers, these frozen rivers of ice, come off the mountains, they start to fracture and buckle and get all twisted up. And they open up in these crevasses that could be a foot across or 10 meters, 20 meters across. And they're all covered with this veneer of snow that could be this deep, meters deep, you just don't know. So you're trying to cross these things in the early hours of the morning when everything's frozen and you're going up the mountain. But you see them, these black pits of abyss, that if you do go in there, it's all over. We spent a good amount of time on this mountain, almost 24 days heading up. Unbelievable peak, super cold, super windy. We had to build big snow walls around our tents every time, just in case that wind came up and just tear us off the peak. Same strategy again, going up and down, up and down. But once again, Mother Nature let me summit out. We had a beautiful summit day. It was about minus 45, 50 on the summit, but absolutely incredible. But once again, there was death on the mountains. From high camp, we noticed a chopper coming off, and then we noticed below it was this body bag swinging on a pendulum. So the reports were a guy just died of exposure at high camp, and he was just getting flown off the mountain. But there it was again, that reflection point. So we summit out, and we want to push off the mountain as quick as we can. We had a weather window to get back off the peak, or we're going to get stuck there for 5-6 days. We just didn't want to spend any more time up there. So we're pushing off in one big hit, this 36 hour push to get off the mountain. We ended up hitting those crevasse fields I was talking about late in the afternoon when you didn't really want to be there. So that veneer of snow that I was mentioning earlier now has the consistency of like a slushy. So you'd be cruising along, and then, boof, your foot will break through. You pull it out and there's just a black hole with a crevasse below. Your heart starts racing. Keep going, next thing your leg will break through. Go a bit further, you might fall up to your waist. Absolutely terrifying. It's the closest I could ever relate to being in like a minefield or something like that. So we're in teams of 3, roped together for that reason, in case one of us did fall. And it wasn't long on that afternoon until the guy on the back of the rope, straight through the snow bridge, into the crevasse, swinging free below us. You had to dive onto your axes to stop his fall. Then we get the other rope team over, we're hooking on, we're trying to set up pulley systems and haul him out of there. Because as cold as it was on top of the snow, it was like 5, 10 below. Below the snow, it's minus 30s, 40s. If we don't get him out quick enough, he could die of exposure as well. There's this whole new dynamic to mountaineering that I knew nothing about. It was absolutely terrifying. And when we finally got through this crevasse field and you're back on terra firma where you know there's ground underneath that snow, it's like, oh, the relief is unbelievable. So that was mountain number 2. After that one, I wanted to do something a little bit easier. So I went to Tanzania to try and climb Kilimanjaro. And I brought my dad along as well. My dad was getting old, he wanted to have an adventure, he's grown up in the outback, he's a country guy, and this is a good one for him. If you wanted to get into adventures, there's 1 or 2 things I'd suggest, either Kilimanjaro or Everest Base Camp. They're great ones to begin with. So off we went. Now, even though it's very, very technically easy, it's just a high altitude trek, a lot of people fail on Kili because the last day is a 1,100 meter push to the summit. And if you try and rush that, you get sick, you get what's called pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, fluid on the lungs and brain. And a lot of people have been rushed off that mountain and people have died on this mountain as well. So for Dad and for myself, because I was still a beginner, we took a long approach. So we spent a number of days building up, going around the mountain, and then we had a crack at it. We summited out on a beautiful morning, got the famous photos at the top in front of the sign, and back down we went. So that was number 3. I went from there down to probably my most favorite place on the planet, Antarctica. Absolutely pristine environment, untouched by humans, untouched. So much so that the companies that set up the like scientific research station down there, they build these ice runways, these blue ice runways that we land on. So you fly from South America and land on these runways. And they have strict protocols where everything's got to be flown off again. So urine, all your waste, every bit of rubbish has got to come off Antarctica itself. So we land at this ALE base. They fly us out on a little fixed wing, so even further out into the interior. Looking out this window, huge crevasses, tops of mountains sticking out of the ice shelf that, you know, in places could be 3, 4, 5,000 feet thick. There's so much ice and snow down there, it's incredible. We land at the base of Vincent Massive, biggest mountain in Antarctica. Now, when you think about mountain, when you think about, say, Kilimanjaro, you see those plains and you see the whole mountain sticking out. It's not like that in Antarctica. You see the ice shelf and then the top of the peak sticking out. And that's where we were going to go to climb. Once again, we've got a sled attached, pack on, and out we go. It was daylight all the time, all the time. The sun dipped just below the peaks in the afternoon, so it's a bit of twilight. The rest of the time, the sun is out. So you're trying to get used to these sleeping patterns where the sun's always shining. Hauling sleds up the peak. Once again, up, down, all the way. Cold like you could never believe. Minus 40s, 50s. On our summit day, we had minus 60 with wind chill. Unbelievable. That cold that if you make a mistake and these big down mitts that we're wearing, if they come off for too long, you're going to lose your fingers. Same with your feet. If you don't sort out your feet, you could lose toes. If your balaclava and your goggles separate for too long, you just get this black frostbitten skin. So you have to be so, so careful. One of the guys on our team had his goggles off for just a little bit too long and he started going snowblind. So that's like your eyes are full of sand, or if you're a welder, getting welder's flash, yeah? Not very nice. And he loses half his vision on our summit push. So there we are, short roping him, trying to get to the summit. We finally get there. Conditions were horrendous. The wind was so strong, it was so cold, we couldn't stop. Just fist in the air with the ice axe on the summit for probably 10 seconds, and then back down we go. So that was Vincent Massive. what's that, 4. From there I went to a totally different environment. From Antarctica and those freezing conditions to West Papua and some of the thickest jungle you've ever seen in your life. Now, I'd been in the military, I'd trained in some really thick bush, I was used to that sort of uncomfortableness, but this was next level jungle. To get to the peak called Carsten's Pyramid, we had to make a 7-day approach through this jungle. To get through all this jungle area, there's lots of different villages, lots of different tribes, and there's still very primitive tribes over there. Still wearing wooden penis tubes, bows and arrows, spears, like the works and jerks. It was incredible to see. And to keep the peace in this area, we had to employ an equal amount of porters from every different village. Otherwise it could cause a battle. So we had to employ 2 from there, 2 from there, 2 from there. We ended up with a porter entourage of about 20. And then they bring their wives, their kids, and their mates that are just hanging around. So we had about 50 locals with us on the approach to this mountain. And so versatile. All barefoot, going through this jungle, we're slipping and falling over and all the latest gear and just having a miserable time. They're just cruising along. They'll make a bridge for us over a river out of trees and vines. You know, can set up shelters and smoke them out to get the bugs away in seconds. They're unbelievable people. And they get us to the base of our mountain, 6 days in. The mountain itself is just this sheer rock sort of fin coming out of the jungle. Just a rock climb. So a bit different to what I'd experienced so far with all that ice and snow. This one's just rock climbing. The porters drop us off and they head back down the valley, a few hours down the valley where they set up in this big cave system and they smoke it out and they live there for a few days while we go up. So up we go. 13 hours of rock climbing to get to the summit, take some incredible photos and footage and back down again. Not overly technical, but enough to really get you exposed to the environment when you're a few thousand feet up, clinging to the rock and having a really, really good time. We had perfect conditions. Back down, just as we got back to base camp, big rain system come in, but we didn't really care because we were back safe, sitting in our tents and celebrating, you know, with some noodles. That night, there was that much rain. Down in the cave system where all the porters were camped up and living, the water had seeped down through the rocks and it dislodged this big slab of stone that come down and crushed the porters. And it killed one of the guys. In their simple minds, or not simple, just in their minds, it was an eye for an eye. That's just how it works over there. So the elders of all these sort of guys that we had with us come charging up the valley at about midnight, machetes and spears, slashing the ground, slashing the tents, and wanted to take the life of one of ours for the life of theirs. Very simple. Our interpreter, he was an Indonesian guy. He sort of knew the dynamics of the situation. He calmed it down. He said, we'll come down to the caves in the morning and we'll assess the body and we'll see what's going on. And they were okay with that. Back down they went and we tried to get back to sleep, but in the morning, myself, another guy named Dean, and our guide went down the valley. We left the rest of the team up at the face. So as I was going down there, I was fresh out of the military. I was running what-if scenarios in my head. What if we get there and they attack us with machetes? What if, you know, they start shooting? Or all these different scenarios. What if we have to run away? And we finally get there. We get down into the caves. People are crying. The younger guys are looking a bit angry. And we see the body. He's messed up. He's got clear stuff coming from his ears. He's swollen everywhere. He looks dead. And Dean, the guy I was with, was a mountain rescue sort of guy. He just went into his procedures, drops down, checks the body, and there's a rise and fall of the chest, a tiny one. He's just breathing. He's still alive. So Dean and I are like, holy shit, we can save this guy. We can, you know, avoid this whole situation. We just got to do something. Now, there was no way we could get that body back through the jungle. It wasn't going to happen. Just over the mountains, just a few hours over the mountains, there was this huge gold mine, massive gold mine, one of the biggest in the world. We were told by the embassies, the adventure companies, and everyone that knew that area to stay away from there. They were under investigation for heaps of humanitarian rights issues. They were getting attacked by the Free Papua movement, this sort of militia group. It was all bad news. So if you go there, it's going to be trouble. But we didn't really have an option. We said, we've got to get this kid out. It's our only chance. So we had the porters build up a stretcher, made it out of tarps, loaded the body in, and off we went. We ended up coming to the edge of the pit. Dean and I walked out into the pit, flagged down a vehicle. They got onto mine security, called the ambulance, and the ambulance did come and collect this body. And they took him away. And we're like, fuck, we've saved a life. We've, done something incredible here. We've saved him. We've avoided this whole situation where one of us could die. Happy days. Then my military thinking kicks in again. Start running what if scenarios. What if this kid dies in 3 days when we're heading back through the jungle? What if he dies when we get to their little village in 6 days, a little village called Shagapa? What happens then? Do they just attack us and kill us then? So we had these questions going through our minds when we got back to the team. And we all sat down together and we said, guys, these are our options. We could go back through the jungle, this might happen. Our only other option was to try and go through the mine and just see what happens. Maybe they'll help us out. So we decided on the mine. We let our porters go, we grabbed our packs, we humped it down to the pit, and in we went. It was not a happy reception like it was when we took a body there. It was a totally different scenario. They wanted us gone, didn't even want to talk to us. When we pushed on the issue, so look, we can't go back in the jungle now, we've got no porters, they arrested us and threw us into a shipping container. So there was 10 of us in this shipping container. And long story short, we stayed there for 7 days. We locked up here for 7 days, and it wasn't until there was a lot of international pressure from the embassies and a lot of other little things that occurred that we were finally not released, we were smuggled out, dressed as miners. So 2 in the morning, we had to dress up, load into a mine vehicle and get smuggled out by this guy who was sympathetic to our cause. To a waiting helicopter that flew us down to Tamika, this town, and then there was a waiting plane there that flew us on to Bali. So this was an expedition unto itself. Get home to lots of media attention. Media tends to love that stuff when you nearly die. And it was a very successful summit day, but an unbelievable saga attached to it. And that was mountain number 5. So I went from there to Russia. I was confident in my climbing ability now. I was, yep, we've got this 7 summits in the bag, let's go. The mountain was called Mount Elbrus, the biggest in Europe. So we get down into the mountains. I had 7 days to get this peak done. The Russians were very, very strict with their visas, so 7 days was it, so we had to get it done. It was in the realm of Kilimanjaro, a little bit easier, not overly technical. You should be able to punch this thing out in a few days. So I hired a local guy named Valentin. It was just gonna be me and him going fast up the peak. Get to the base of the mountain, we acclimatise well, and we have a crack. Me and him moving fast, we're going for it. We're gonna skip our high camp and just go all the way to the summit. We get within about 4 hours of the south summit, and Mother Nature just said, nah, not today. Winds come up, whiteout conditions, forced us back down the peak. Got back down, I was a little bit heartbroken, but I knew we had a few days left in the bag. We're gonna have a crack at this when the weather clears up. So we had a day's rest, and then we went up again. This time we got within a couple of hours of the summit, and Mother Nature said, no, not this time. Winds come up, forced us back down. But we hid behind a rock for a long time because we didn't have time for another attempt. So Valentin and I sitting behind this rock and just staring at each other. And he turns to me and he says, I'll never forget it. It's better to come to the mountains 10 times and go home than to come once and never go home. And it was then that I knew we'd failed. It's like, wow, he's right. We're not going to make a stupid decision. We're going to turn around and go down. And that's what we did. So we turned around and started making our way down the peak. On the way down, over on this right ridge, we noticed this crashed helicopter. It was all mangled on its side, and we hadn't noticed it before. Valentin thought, why don't we just go and hide in this wreckage out of the wind and wait for the weather to clear up, see if it clears up the next number of hours. I thought, beautiful, let's go. Any glimmer of hope, I'm in, let's do it. So we get to the wreckage, we wedge open the door, we fall inside, we pull the door shut, and then there's an AK-47 straight at my head. There's a Russian soldier in there protecting this downed helicopter. He's got it straight at me. Valentine's going crazy, yelling at him. He's yelling at Valentine. I'm there sort of like this. And the situation calms down a bit. But he wouldn't let us stay. He said, no way, get back out. Valentine's trying to tell him we could die out there. The storm's raging. Please just let us stay. Get out. It was his job to protect the intelligence of this helicopter. I can understand why he's upset, sitting up there alone in this shithole of a place, but we had to go back out into the storm. So out we went, fought our way down. We made it off safely. We had our photo at the bottom, just happy to be alive and to have another chance to climb the mountain. But that was my first big failure. And it was also at the end of the year, and it was also when I ran out of money. So all my mining money was gone, and I couldn't keep going with my 7 Summits, goal. But looking back on the year, it was a massive success. Apart from that gut-wrenching failure and the inability to do number 7, it was hugely successful. And I learned lots and lots and lots that year. But the biggest thing that I learned was about death and about confronting death. So after seeing those guys up on these mountains that have died, I started looking at death a different way. I used to think I was going to live till I was 100, at least 90. I've got my whole life ahead of me. We got time. But when I saw those guys frozen, I said, no, you don't. Death could come for you at any time. Any one of us. Statistically, we're not going to make it past 60. So I started looking at my life in 5-year blocks. I said, righto, I'm going to die in 5 years. Convince yourself, I'm going to die in 5. What are you going to achieve from now until you die? 5 years' time. And that's how I stack up my life now. That's how my wife and I both stack up our lives in 5-year blocks. Now that mentality is not good for careers and mortgages, but it's very good for health and happiness. And we're going to crack on with that.